Okay, students. So today, a topic which is of much importance to you, but let me put a disclaimer first. Don't come back to me or Dr. Radhakrishna later that we attended this presentation and still we could not pass. So this is not a guarantee. But I feel, having been an examiner for a long time, that there are occasions when a good student, a student who knows the subject, but because of poor communication, he or she doesn't make it. And that is very unfortunate. So, how you answer the questions in the exam would not help you to pass if you don't know the subject, but the reverse is true. That sometimes you know everything, but still because you don't answer it properly, the examiners are not happy with you. So this presentation will probably help you to avoid that unfortunate situation. Once again, my email address is there, vkkapoor.india@gmail.com. If you have any queries related to this, please let me know. Also, if you send me a mail and just write uh, tips for exam in the subject of the mail, I will be happy to send you some general chapters from my book, which will give you more instructions as to how to present cases in the exam. So, what does examination mean? Actually, I wanted to add another term, which is investigation. So, investigation is done by a police officer of a suspect. So, when there is a crime, somebody is caught, and that person is a suspect. So, investigation is done by the police. And examination actually comes from the word cross examination, when a witness is cross examined by a lawyer or by a judge in a court of law. And actually, the correct term which we should use for you, the student, to be evaluated by us, the teachers, is evaluation and not examination. But the word examination has come to become the standard term. Now, at your level, when we are talking of MS or DNB in general surgery, there are three components: theory papers, which obviously your knowledge is important, and then the clinical or the practical examination, which we are going to talk about in detail today. And last component is viva voce. I think usually it is 50, 40, 10, but I'm not sure whether now there is any change. So just a few words about the theory paper. As I said, that in theory, knowledge is very, very important, because unless you know the question, you cannot answer it. But again, even when you know the contents, how you answer, how you present helps the examiner to evaluate. Because you must remember that any examiner, be it MS or DNB, has probably hundreds, if not hundreds, scores of notebooks to check in a very short time. And therefore, I'm sure many examiners don't read every word that you write. They just probably flip through the pages and get a sense of what you have written. So your presentation becomes very important. And some general tips which I can say or give is that use headings and subheadings liberally, so that when I'm going through your answer, I know where you have changed from one subheading to another and from one heading to another. For example, if you are asked to discuss, say, management of upper GI bleed, then you say investigations and management. In investigations, you talk of upper GI endoscopy, you talk of CT angiography. Then when you come to management, you say resuscitation, preparation, non-surgical management, endoscopic management, surgical management, and all that. So even if I read your headings and subheadings, I know that you have covered the broad spectrum of the topic. Underline important things, use color. We used to use color when we were in school, but even in this MS or DNB examination, I don't mind if you use colors to highlight or to pinpoint certain important parts of your answer. Use boxes like you read in book chapters, use tables, use algorithms and line diagrams, because as is the saying that a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So what you can write in a paragraph, you can easily convert it into an algorithm, which is much easier for the examiner to read. And I remember when I was in class 12, there was a question on protein synthesis. And I just made a one-page diagram, and the examiner was kind enough to give me 10 out of 10 because everything was covered in the algorithmic diagram. So rather than writing a detailed 3-4 page text, which an examiner will find it very difficult to read, if you can condense it into an algorithmic diagram or a flow chart or a table, that is much easier on the eyes of the examiner. Now I come to the main part of this today's discussion, the clinical or practical examination. And I think in most examinations, there are cases, patients, long cases, short cases. And then I think at some examinations, we do a kind of a ward round. I know we do it at MCH level. I'm not sure whether it is done at the MS level. And then if you go to the Royal College examinations, there are actors. So these are people who have been trained to behave like a patient, basically for history taking. And when you ask them questions, they will give you answers. So a patient may behave like a patient with periampullary carcinoma. So you ask him, what is wrong with you? He will say, I have jaundice for 3 months. And then you ask him questions and he will keep giving you replies as if he or she is a patient of periampullary carcinoma. And then you have what is known as an objectively structured clinical examination, where there is no human interaction, there is no patient, there is no evaluator also. There are some spots like a specimen, an instrument, an X-ray, a picture, an image, a specimen, whatever, a clinical scenario, and you just write your response on a sheet of paper. Or it could be even computer-based, internet-based. So you put your response online and it takes your response. So these are spots. Now, in the long case, which is almost an essential part of any examination, clinical examination, very important is time management. You are usually told, but if you are not told, you should ask your examiner or the person who's helping to conduct the exam, how much time do you have for the case? And if you are given, say, 30 minutes, don't spend 30 minutes on the case. I would say spend 25 minutes on the case and then keep 5 minutes for yourself. So how do you proceed? You ask, which means you take a good history, and then you see. That means you examine the patient, and after examination, certain things may come to your mind, and you go back and ask some more supplementary questions. And once you have done this, then you write this down in the form of notes. In some exams, it is mandatory. In some exams, it is not mandatory to write notes, but I would suggest that you write notes, at least the important points. Notes can come to your rescue. Suppose you are saying something during your presentation, and one of the examiners who's busy with his phone or with something else hasn't listened to you and says, you didn't mention this. You can always say, sir, I mentioned, and please see, I have recorded it in my notes also. And this also saved me once when it happened with me in DNB exam. Now, once you are writing notes, then keep thinking. And what do you think? I will tell you a little later. And once you start thinking, some more questions may come to your mind, which you missed either in the history or in the examination. So you go back and take more history and do more examination. And then in the last 5 minutes, rehearse. Rehearse what? Some standard questions which will almost always be asked in any long case. And I will tell you what those questions are. So basically a long case, your part is history and examination, and then the examiners will ask you the diagnosis and the management. And please remember, management is not only treatment. Management includes investigation also. So don't jump onto treatment, start with investigations. Now, history standard, I don't have to tell you, you all have done this during your MBBS, but again, to reiterate, the presenting complaints, which should not be more than 2, maximum 3, a history of present illness in chronological order, the associated symptoms. Now, associated symptoms means in a patient with jaundice, especially if you are thinking of malignant jaundice, whether there is history of fever with chills and rigors, high-grade fever, suggestive of cholangitis, pruritus, color of urine, color of stools, and if you are thinking of malignancy, anorexia and weight loss. Similarly, if it is GI bleed, whether there is hematemesis, whether there is melena, whether there is hematochezia, what is the color of the blood, what is the amount of blood. So related symptoms to the presenting complaints. And then an organ or system review. And in that also the more important, more relevant organ first and other organs later. In a patient with cancer, metastatic history, definitely anorexia, weight loss, symptoms to suggest pulmonary or pleural metastasis, which would include hemoptysis, chest pain, dyspnea on exertion, bone pain, fracture on trivial trauma or without trauma, and all those things. And then definitely treatment history, very important, drug history, especially in elderly patients, especially in relation to antiplatelet drugs, young women, oral contraceptive pills, elderly women, hormone replacement therapy, because all these are important from the point of view of preparation and management of the patient. And then, of course, personal and family history. Family history, if your differential diagnosis includes a disease which has strong genetic or familial or hereditary etiology, family history should not be a statement like there is no family history of similar disorder. You should say that the patient's parents, grandparents, uncles, granduncles, aunts, siblings, and children are all healthy, or somebody died at a young age of probably a suspected cancer, or I don't know the cause. So from your description, it should become clear to me that you are thinking of a familial hereditary genetic condition, and you have gone into a detailed family history. And if family history is positive, it is always good to make a family chart. You know those circles and squares, to draw it, and then to draw the index case, and to draw any suspect case in the family. Negative history is also important, but organize it again system and organ wise. For example, put jaundice, pruritus, high-grade fever with chills and rigors, and such things together. Similarly, put loin pain, dysuria, hematuria in one sentence, and give small pauses between these phrases so that you are conveying that you have looked into all the symptoms. And at MS level, your presentation of history should be like a story. It should be a little bit organized and in a flow in chronological order, rather than appearing to be disjointed in pieces, a bunch of anecdotes, because the patient tells you like anecdotes, but you have to convert it into a free-flowing story. So at the end of the history, most examiners will ask you to summarize the history. And when you are asked to do that, please do not repeat the history. There is a difference between repeat and summarize. In summary, you mention the important, all positive, and some important negative points. So for example, the summary could be, this is an elderly gentleman who has 3 months history of painless progressive jaundice, which is not associated with, at this level, you can say features of cholangitis, or if you want to be extra careful, say not associated with high-grade fever with chills and rigors. There is significant anorexia and weight loss. There is no history of hematemesis or melena. So that summary, actually you people are born in the WhatsApp generation. Earlier we used to have what was called a telegram. So you had to pay for each word. So you have to condense the message into the minimum number of words so that you don't end up paying too much. And that is what a summary should be.
Sir,
and then
if I can interrupt for a minute, Professor T.R. Gopalan, a very senior surgeon, wants to make a comment. Sir.
Oh, sure. Please, sir, please feel free to interrupt in between any time. Please.
Professor T.R., welcome, sir.
Yeah, thanks, but please go on. He had already just made the point. Thank you very much. Let him continue. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
But sir, please feel free to interrupt me in between and make any additional point if you want.
Sure, sir.
Thank you. Sir.
And then I may ask you, what do you think? Now, what do you think is not summary. There is a difference. If I ask you to summarize the history, you summarize the important points. If I ask you what do you think, then you give an analysis of the history. So in the same scenario, if I ask you what do you think, you should say, sir, I think this is a patient with malignant surgical obstructive jaundice, probably periampullary carcinoma. If I ask you to summarize, then you say what I said earlier. And same way, it could be what do you make out of it, or what is your diagnosis. So there is a difference between summary and interpretation or analysis. Then you go on to examination. And now, if in MS examination, usually you are given a case and examiners are sitting in another room and either examining some other candidates or having a cup of tea. But in the Royal College examinations, you are being watched. And as a rule also, otherwise as a courtesy, when you want to examine a patient, you must take a verbal consent. So you don't go and ask, can I examine you? You say, dear sir, or dear ma'am, or Mataji, or beta, whatever, depending on the age of the patient, क्या मैं आपको examine कर सकता हूँ? And you should, of course, behave like a doctor, be well-mannered and have bedside etiquettes. And always look before you leap. So do a careful inspection. Many a time, a lump is better seen rather than palpated, because a very large lump you can miss if you are not very careful. Similarly, obviously, movement with respiration sometimes, especially in thin-built patients, will be better seen rather than felt with your finger. Don't miss a scar, and this has happened. Students have failed because they did not notice a well-healed scar, especially if the patient has grown a beard of a parotid swelling. So it was a recurrent parotid tumor rather than a primary parotid tumor because the surgery had been done. Pulsations, again, will be better seen if you put your eyes at the level of the anterior abdominal wall and sit down by the side of the bed, and then you cannot miss the pulsations. And your description, again, yes, you follow the same format which you used to follow in the undergraduate days, but it should be a pictorial description. Even if I'm blind, even if I'm not looking at the patient, even if the patient is not in front of me, from your description, a picture of the abdomen or of whatever area you are describing should emerge in my mind. And this is more important for superficial swellings, like a neck swelling, like a parotid swelling, like a limb swelling, where a lump is seen and palpable. And of course, you must emphasize the important findings, which are going to decide your differential diagnosis or your interpretation, which could be the site, especially in the abdomen, which could be the consistency, which could be fixity or movement of the lump. Before that, the general physical examination, very important, especially in patients with cancer and those who you think are going to go for major surgery, the performance status or the nutritional status. There is no point in talking of CT scan, PET scan, MRI, endoscopic ultrasound in a 90-year-old lady who cannot even walk out of her bed, and you are thinking of doing a pancreatic duodenectomy. So if such is a situation, when you are discussing the management of the patient, you could say that, in my opinion, this lady is not fit for the procedure which would be required, even if the lesion is resectable, and therefore I would think of non-surgical management. Pedal edema in cancer, especially in cancer patients where nutrition is an issue. If you have pedal edema and you don't have fluid in any other cavity, like sorry, the reverse, that if you have ascites without pedal edema, you start thinking of malignant ascites rather than nutritional ascites. And lymph node examination, many a time I have heard students saying there is no lymphadenopathy. No, at this stage you should not say that. You should, even your negative finding description should be specific, should be targeted, should be diagnosis oriented. So if you are talking of an abdominal or a testicular or a breast cancer, you should say there is no left supraclavicular lymphadenopathy. If your differential diagnosis includes tuberculosis, you should say there is no palpable lymph node in the upper deep cervical area. And if you are thinking of a possible lymphoma, say a hepatosplenomegaly, you should say there is low lymphadenopathy in the neck, in the axilla, or in the groin. So from your description, I know what is going on in your mind and what is your possible differential diagnosis. At this level, I should be able to read from your presentation your mind, what is going on in your mind, rather than an undergraduate who just takes a history and examination and presents it and then discusses some theoretical questions. So just some examples. If you have a groin mass, you have to examine the limb for edema, for pulses, whether there is any difference, whether they're absent, is there any neurological involvement resulting in sensory loss. So although, yes, we are not internal medicine people, we are not neuro scientists, but we should do at least a basic cursory neurological examination. Similarly, if you have a lymph node mass or a possible lymph node mass and you don't examine the drainage area, so if you have a groin swelling and you don't examine the perianal area, scrotum, external genitalia, I don't think that any examiner would pass you. And similarly, if you have a lymph nodal mass, if you don't mention other lymph nodes specifically, not saying that there is no lymphadenopathy, you should say there are no lymph nodes palpable in the neck, in the axilla, in the other groin, and a specific mention of hepatosplenomegaly. Similarly, when you have an abdominal lump, whether it is epigastric or in the groin, if you don't mention testes, whether they are present, whether they are normal, because it could be an undescended testis with a malignant change, if it is in the groin or loin, or it could be a testicular tumor with an epigastric lump. And again, I can tell you a very senior surgeon who's today head of the department of surgery in a very prestigious institution failed in the MS examination because he did not examine the testes in a patient with epigastric mass, and unfortunately it was a testicular tumor with epigastric para-aortic nodes. And same way, if you have a hard fixed right iliac fossa mass, examination of spine, hip, testes again. So when you are examining, when you are writing your notes, when you are thinking what is the possible diagnosis, all these points should come to your mind, and then you go back and, as I said, you ask again and you see again. Some irrelevant examinations at the level of MS, some of us, the liberal examiners, will accept. For example, if the lump is in the hypogastrium, you don't have to talk of that the lump doesn't move with respiration. We don't expect a hypogastric mass to move with respiration. Similarly, if it is a large mass which is already seen protruding the anterior abdominal wall, obviously you don't look for ballotability, because ballotability is when it is not palpable with the anterior hand and then you push and then the mass comes and strikes. If it is touching your anterior hand, where are you doing the ballotability? And again, in such a mass, there is no point in doing a knee elbow test because the mass is already touching the anterior abdominal wall. And similarly, if there is no dullness in the flank, there is no need to mention shifting dullness, because what is going to shift? There is no dullness, so what will shift? But if you want to be absolutely safe, no harm in mentioning it, because some examiners may be a little finicky about all the details. So again, at the end of the examination, I can ask you to summarize the examination. Now listen very carefully. I am asking you to summarize the examination. So you only summarize the examination. Don't include history in this. Or I may ask you, what are the important findings in examination? Then you mention all positive and important negative findings. Or I may ask you, how has the examination added to the history? So it could be a same case, painless progressive jaundice, but on examination you found a distended gallbladder. So then you could say that since I have palpated a distended gallbladder, I think the block is at the lower end of the CBD, and because it is painless progressive jaundice, I think it is periambulary carcinoma. Or it could be, has your diagnosis changed now? For example, the history was of a lady who's 50-year-old with 2 weeks history of a lump which she has palpated in her breast. So obviously you will think of malignancy on that basis of history. But when you examine, you find a smooth, well-defined, freely mobile mouse in the breast. So then your diagnosis changes. So these are some standard questions which may be asked, and you should be mentally prepared to answer these questions. Don't take them at that moment. You should know that these questions are likely to be asked, and you should very well rehearse what answer you are going to give. Again, at the end of examination, I may ask you to summarize the case. If I say summarize the case, then I am asking you to summarize the history and examination both. And then I can ask you, what do you think or what do you make out of it? So then you give your interpretation of the history and examination. If I ask you what is the diagnosis, then you give the diagnosis. If I ask you what do you think, then you give your thought process. So the diagnosis could be jaundice, surgical obstructive jaundice, malignant surgical obstructive jaundice, probably in the pancreas, with cholangitis, gastric outlet obstruction. It could be thyroid swelling, a diffuse thyroid swelling, or a nodular thyroid swelling, whether it is hyper or hypo or euthyroid, and whether there are any pressure symptoms. In most cases, there will be a differential diagnosis. There are some cases where there is a single diagnosis, so don't hesitate to say that, no sir, this is my claim. For example, an elderly lady with a hard fixed lump with skin involvement, there is no other differential diagnosis. So you say, no sir, my clinical diagnosis is CA breast and I would not like to entertain any other differential diagnosis. But in many cases, there will be a differential diagnosis, and in fact, in some cases, there will be no diagnosis possible. So if that is so, even at the end of the examination, for example, a young lady with pain in the epigastrium for 6 months, no findings on examination. Obviously, you can't make a diagnosis. So then you start discussing what are the possible organs or systems likely to be involved. So in an upper abdominal symptom or finding, it would be stomach, pancreas, liver, spleen, transverse colon, retroperitoneum, and all that. And then you start thinking the possible pathology, whether it is congenital, traumatic, inflammatory, infective, neoplastic, like that. So you give a thought process, and then you say that this is the possible. So in this patient, you would say that since it is epigastric pain, it could be stomach, it could be pancreas, it could be liver, it could be spleen. But according to statistics and taking the fact that she is a young patient, I would not consider malignancy. This is probably a benign disorder. Peptic ulcer disease is common. Gallstone disease is common. Chronic pancreatitis may be considered. So that is how you say that these are the various possibilities. And when you make a diagnosis, as
sir,
I said...
Can I just make a point, sir?
Sure.
Sir, this is Dr. Gopalan, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, one other issue I wanted to just say, because you're just concluding the part of the history and physical exam and
Yes.
dental exam. I think sometimes some examiners tend to ask, have you examined the left axilla?
Yes.
And some students at that time get perplexed, and they just try to tell is not there or nothing is positive, sir. I feel in an examination, it's better to be as honest as possible to the examiner. If the particular candidate has really not examined the axilla, it's better to say, sorry, sir, I have not examined. Would you accept that answer, sir? Because instead of saying error of omission and error of commission, I think that's a very important point we like to tell the students who are experiencing for the examination. So your experience on that, sir.
Very, very important, very important. Please do not forget that the stage which you are in, we all have been in that stage, and we all have done that mistake. We have seen students doing that mistake. But acceptance of not having done something is much better, much safer than telling a lie and trying to hoodwink. And most examiners are much more experienced and much more smarter than you, and they will very easily pick up whether you are trying to bluff. So bluff doesn't have any place, any role in the exam. Most examiners will not pass a student who's trying to bluff. Many of us would pass you if you accept that I didn't do this. Very important. So when you give your diagnosis, you must give a complete diagnosis. Don't just say portal hypertension. If it is so, there are features, you say portal hypertension with cirrhosis. So there is ascites, there is shrunken liver span, and then if there is ascites, there is pedal edema, you could say probably child B status. That means defunctioning, decompensation of liver. Say splenomegaly, because that is important point, especially if it is symptomatic to decide the treatment. If there is history to suggest or findings to suggest hypersplenism, for example, petechiae, which are not related to any trauma. If the patient has history of bleed, then you say this is bleeder, because that again is going to decide what intervention to do. And if the patient has received treatment, but in spite of that patient is bleeding, so you say failed DST, because that is what will probably push you in the discussion of management towards surgical management. So give a complete diagnosis. Don't give an opportunity to ask the examiner to ask you counter questions. So if you say portal hypertension, I will ask you what etiology, then you say cirrhosis, then I will ask you, is he compensated? No, he is child B. So don't let the examiner give opportunity to ask counter questions. Answer the question incomplete as much as you can in the first time. Next comes the management. So as I said earlier, we may ask you, what will you do, or how would you proceed? How will you manage? Again, don't jump onto treatment, because management means investigations, preparation, especially if the patient has some problems, and treatment. So these are three important components of management. Of course, if we have discussed investigations and then I ask you what will you do, then I'm trying to ask you treatment. But if at this stage I ask you what will you do, I'm asking you all three: investigations, preparation, and management. And many of you tend to forget preparation. Preparation is very, very important in some situations. Investigations, general principles, and this is a very frequent question which students ask me, that what should we mention as the first? I am of the opinion that the most diplomatic and safest way in the exam is to say, sir, I would like to do some investigations for the diagnosis and another set of investigations for a workup of this patient for management. Now it is up to the examiner to ask, okay, what will you for diagnosis? So, for example, in most abdominal situations or in breast or in thyroid, for diagnosis, usually it is an ultrasound because it is, as you know, all these advantages. But if it is a malignancy, then for staging, we almost always would do a CT scan, and in some cancers, we may do a PET scan. And for workup, it is the usual investigations, but please do not mention, I will do routine investigations, I will do blood investigations. Blood investigations can be creatinine kinase also. Would you do that? No. So be specific. Say, I would like to do a complete hemogram. There is a difference between hemoglobin and hemogram. Hemogram includes hemoglobin, TLC, DLC, platelets. Hemoglobin is only hemoglobin. Complete blood count includes only RBC, WBC, and platelet count. Literally and semantically speaking, it doesn't include hemoglobin. So what most surgical practice we will do is either hemoglobin or a hemogram. And don't mention coagulation profile. Sometimes you mention liver function test, presuming that coagulation profile is included in that. But please, nothing is understood in the exam. What you say is taken. What you don't say is not taken. By and large, in malignancy, you must mention chest X-ray before you go on to invasive, expensive investigations like CT scan, PET scan, endoscopic ultrasound, or MRI. Because if chest X-ray shows a metastasis, in most cancers, not in all, most cancers, probably it will put a full stop to further investigation. So don't get caught on that. By and large, an ultrasound before CT scan. There may be a situation where you may not do an ultrasound. For example, let me tell you, say a right colonic malignancy. Now, even if ultrasound shows metastasis, treatment probably will not change. But there's no harm in saying an ultrasound first in most of the situations. Definitely in HPV malignancies, ultrasound is important because in most HPV malignancies, if ultrasound shows a liver metastasis, probably you would not go further. And by and large, if you are thinking of a GI disease, endoscopy is first investigation. If you are thinking of a solid organ disease, ultrasound is usually the first investigation. Many a time we ask you, which one will you do first? So this is a general principle which I would suggest you can follow. Again, for treatment, if it is malignancy, first you have to stage. So proper staging of the disease is very important, and that could be starting with chest X-ray, ultrasound, CT scan, PET scan, US or whatever. And preparation is very important. A patient who has had recurrent bleed, hemoglobin may be low. Patient who has pedal edema, nutritional status may be compromised. Patient who has jaundice may have coagulopathy. Patient who has had recent cholangitis may still be in sepsis. So some of these situations require preparation before you operate upon the patient. Then there would be a session either here or in the Viva Voce on operative surgery, where we put some slips in front of you and you pick up a slip and then you describe that operation. So don't start with the procedure itself. If the examiner doesn't ask you anything, start with indications, common indications. You don't have to mention the entire list, which you would mention in the theory paper. Some important contraindications, some important points in preparation, what anesthesia, the position, especially if it is a special position like lithotomy, Trendelenburg, a neck turned to one side, neck extended or whatever, and then come to the procedure. Also, if time permits, and obviously if you are asked, some common complications and important points in the post-operative care. So that is how you complete an operative surgery, and this is important, especially if you are if this is being done as a part of the Viva Voce. Now we come to the short cases. Most of the time, short cases, the examiners will be in front of you and they would say examine, and then they will start asking questions. So in these cases, you don't have to take a detailed history. It's not usually required because there is an obvious finding. But as you are examining, keep thinking, and you can ask some questions which will help you to make a diagnosis. Most of the times, the Viva Voce starts, what is your diagnosis? What will you do? So you have to understand that presentation of a short case has to be different from presentation of a long case, because usually they will allocate 5, maximum 10 minutes for a short case. So don't waste your time on unnecessary detailed history and unrelated examination in a short case. If you do that, you will not be able to score the brownie points of investigation and management. In the Viva Voce, some standard questions like which journal do you read, what journal have you read recently, which recent article have you read. Many examiners are fond of asking this. And then don't have a blank face. Even if you don't read journals and articles regularly, for the sake of exam, at least read some recent articles, good articles, popular articles related to diseases which we commonly see, and have a summary of those articles in your mind. You should always know what is the Indian contribution. And in that context, Dr. Radhakrishna, I am in the process of preparing a possible presentation that what is the Indian contribution to surgical gastroenterology. If you want, I can make that presentation at some day, because it is very kind of disheartening for us to know that either from your own institution or from your sister institution in the city or in the state, an important contribution has been made in a particular area, but you are not aware of it. This is not expected. You should know what contribution to surgery has been made. Many a time at the end of the interview, and of course, if this question is asked, you know that you have passed. What are your plans for future? And then again, don't give a blank look. No, I will decide. I haven't decided as yet. These are philosophical questions. We are assessing you that have you become a mature human being? Have you become a mature doctor? Are you capable of becoming an independent consultant surgeon? So these philosophical issues, I can ask you what is your opinion about single incision laparoscopic surgery. Even if you don't know much about it, even if you don't have an opinion, have the basic knowledge and kind of common sense to discuss some issue or debate some issue with the examiners. So basically, there are 3 levels of examinations. You are at the middle. At the level of MBBS examinations, it is only knowledge which helps you to pass. But at the level of MS, we expect more. We expect that you should know, but you should also know how to apply that knowledge. And of course, at MCH level, we want decision making also in a given scenario. Now, if time permits, can I take a few minutes, Dr. Patel? Can I take a few more minutes? Okay, I will go on. Some general points about clinical examination, and this has happened with students, especially in DNB exam. Please make sure that you reach the correct place. There are many branches of Max hospitals and Fortis hospitals in Delhi. So even if you know your exam center is Max, you should know which Max. Because if you reach the wrong Max hospital and then try to run to the other hospital, you will be late. Even in the same hospital, there may be different wards, different places which sound or look similar. So make sure that you reach the correct place. And I would suggest that it is better that you make what is known as a reconnaissance visit a day before, evening before, to make sure what is the correct venue of the examination. And this has happened, was about to happen with me when I made my first visit abroad, because I didn't know that there are 5 airports in London. Of course, some general points. You should appear not like a student, you should appear like a surgeon, because then only you will pass to become a surgeon. So dress, your grooming is very important, and please make sure that you don't carry. Best is not to carry it. Leave it with your wife, with your girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, or whosoever. Please don't carry your mobile, because accidentally, if it rings, it's the most not only irritating and annoying, but definitely some examiners will not like it. I remember a very senior examiner. I can name him because he is so kind and polite, Dr. N.M. Gupta of PGI Chandigarh. After he had finished the examination and signed the result, he then asked me, Dr. Kapoor, can I call this student back? I will definitely not name the student because I want to give him a piece of advice. So I said yes. So that student was called, and then Dr. Gupta told him, boy, we have passed you, but don't go to a gymnasium in a suit and tie and black shoes, because he came for the examination dressed in a jean and sport shoes. So please mind your appearance in the examination. Always be very, very courteous. Of course, not courteous to the extent, and this also I have seen, that don't touch the feet of the patient. Be courteous, but don't be that kind of overdo it. Be gentle when you are examining them, especially children, especially elderly patients, especially when you anticipate that the lump may be tender or it may be painful to manipulate, for example, a testicular mass. Be confident, but don't be overconfident. Don't show your nervousness. I've seen a student chewing a gum throughout the examination. Not done, not acceptable. Don't be scared. Again, I have seen a student offering Hanuman Chalisa while waiting for his long case. Don't do that in the examination. Again, before you answer, so even when you are answered a question, don't jump on to answer the question even before or just as soon as the question is finished. Listen to the question, think for a few seconds, organize your mind for another few seconds, and then speak. And whenever you are asked a question, please give the answer first and justification later. A very common mistake with students, they start with the justification and then very hesitatingly come to the answer, which shows me your lack of confidence. So don't beat around the bush. And as I said, your notes may come to your rescue during the cross-examination. Dr. Bhatta, you can stop me anytime when you want. I know English is not our first language, but try to be as correct in your language, because sometimes language and pronunciation and expression can create problem. I know that in Western UP, when we want to say the patient is a known diabetic, we say non-diabetic. So, but the two are different. So make sure that you want what you want to say, you make it clear, whether it is known diabetic or non-diabetic. And again, definitely don't shout, but don't be too low in volume also, so that some of the examiners like me who are hard of hearing may not be able to listen to what you are saying. Body language is very important. Usually there are many examiners, so try to face the examiner who has asked you the question, but keep looking at other examiners also, so that they don't feel ignored or neglected by you. When you give an answer to a specific question, be very clear and to the point, because your clarity shows your thought and your expression. As I said, be confident, but don't be hesitant, but don't be adamant also. We have seen, like the other day we were discussing this case where the student said that this patient has cirrhosis, but there were no features of cirrhosis, and examiner was trying to hint that could it be non-cirrhotic portal hypertension also, but the student was very adamant. So don't be very adamant. If the examiner is trying to push you to another area of discussion, be a little flexible. Be complete in your description. So when you are describing an upper abdominal or umbilical lump, make sure that you have looked for and you describe pulsations. Be precise. Don't say that the lump is red on palpation or the first big toe is a big toe, and be specific. So if you are talking of abdominal mass, saying that there are no cervical nodes is not good enough. You should say there are no left supraclavicular nodes. Give your answer which is related to the question or related to the diagnosis. What is relevant and what is important, and please remember that common things are common, and don't mention what you don't see in your day-to-day practice or you don't do in your day-to-day practice. So if you don't do an US guided FNAC, if you don't do a perioperative cholangiogram during cholecystectomy, don't mention it in clinical examination. You may describe it in theory, But in clinical examination, as far as possible, don't say what you don't do in your day-to-day clinical practice. If you enter into an argument or a discussion, you can quote something in support of your answer. Best is at this level to quote a standard textbook, if you remember, or published literature. And if nothing else, then you can say, this is what my department does. That usually is helpful only in the MS examination, because your teachers are there as an internal examiner. In DNB, of course, that situation is not there to your advantage. Few don'ts: please do not make an attempt to know the diagnosis. And many a time we try to do that. Some of your younger colleagues may try to do that in order to help you, but it doesn't help, because once you know the diagnosis, then your mind is set on that. Then you are biased, and then you ignore some of the important points in history and try to prove your diagnosis correct, which is not right. And again, I have had a student who knew that this child had portal hypertension because of cirrhosis. It's not that cirrhosis is not known in children. And then he was all the time trying to convince the examiners that no, this is cirrhotic portal hypertension. Whereas when you see a child with portal hypertension, you try to discuss extrahepatic portal venous obstruction, non-cirrhotic portal hypertension. But because he knew the diagnosis, he could not deviate from that, and he kept insisting that this is cirrhosis. So please don't try to know the diagnosis. And please do not interrupt the examiners. Let them complete what they are saying. Do not enter into an argument with them. Discussion is fine, but don't enter into an argument. Don't keep on repeating the same thing again and again. And as I said, don't be rigid, don't be adamant. Be flexible. If the examiners are trying to take you to another topic or another area of discussion, be flexible to do that. Don't be vague. Don't say we can do either CT or MRI. If I ask you what investigation will you do first in a patient with dysphagia, don't say, sir, we can do either endoscopy or barium. Say what you want to say. In this case, in this particular patient, what would you do? Say that. And as far as possible, don't make contradictory diagnosis. So in the same case, try to avoid making both benign and malignant diagnosis as far as possible. So again, in examinations, nothing is taken for granted. So if you don't mention that I will take a consent for stoma in a patient who's going to have a low anterior resection, it is not understood. You have to say. Don't think that if you have said that the lump is cystic, I have understood that it is soft and fluctuant. You have to describe it, because the findings are soft and fluctuant. Cystic is an interpretation. So don't mention in the examination, unless of course it's a spot or a short case where time is limited. So ultimate aim is to pass the examination, get a degree like this, which as you can see, I got about 30 years ago. Again, my email address, vkkapoor.india@gmail.com. If you want that chapter from my book on how to present cases, please send me a mail. Don't write anything in the mail. Just send me a mail, write tips for examination. And all the emails that I receive, say by maybe tomorrow evening, I will respond day after tomorrow or so and send you a copy of the chapters. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful lecture as usual. Any comments from the audience?
Maybe Dr. Gopalan first.
Sir, PRG, sir, yes.
Yes, Dr. Kapoor, that was an excellent presentation. Almost the basics of how a student should really appear, right from the appearance of his presentation. And just a couple of points to add to what you said. You had said the picture is worth 1,000 words in the theory paper. I would also like the students to draw a good picture of some of the important relevant findings, even in the clinical examination. It will give you a lot of importance, because I remember once a student had nicely written the external genitalia, test is normal, but somehow during the presentation, he was not able to present it. But then he was quickly able to say that I already examined the testis, sir, I mentioned it as normal. So the picture was actually there, which was very useful, and the diagram helped him out in the examination, sir.
I'll call you after.
Hello?
Yes, very important, very important.
So I would recommend the students to draw a nice diagrammatic picture of some of the important examination finding also, which will again go a long way.
Definitely.
So the second, I mean, and the point which you nicely made about the solid tumors where we go for an ultrasound first, and for the the gut lesions, you go for an endoscopy first. I just wanted to ask, particularly in relation to the left colonic region with the right colon. The question always, sometimes some examiners ask whether we need to do a barium enema first or a colonoscopy second, or a colonoscopy first or a barium enema, especially in relation to the right colon. I mean, what will be some students do get confused at that particular point of time. So, can you just give an highlight on that for the clarity of the students as well?
I think by and large now at most places, good endoscopy services are available. So we would hardly ever do a barium examination in colon. We would always go for colonoscopy and then decide the further course. The only place where we may do a barium is in upper GI dysphagia. If based on history, we think it is more likely to be a motility disorder rather than obstructive dysphagia, then probably we will do a barium swallow. But otherwise, in most GI situations, I think endoscopy would be the first investigation.
Fine. I think that settles this course. Thank you very much. And once again, I appreciate the very basic points and an excellent presentation done by you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the audience? Anirban Saha, you want to say something? Sir, there is a comment, actually, a strange comment in the Facebook group saying, sometimes examiners come with a preconceived notion of failing a candidate, whatever a candidate says. Is that true?
No. I can say 99.9% of the examiners today do not come with this. We are there to help you pass. If you dig your own grave, then it's difficult.
So what are yes, sir. So what are the cardinal mistakes, in sense that, fatal mistakes, if say one or two, what the student should not do at all? You mentioned so many of them, but then some mistakes where they cannot ever come out of.
First, of course, is knowledge. You have to know your subject. That goes without saying. But after that, as we already discussed, if you try to bluff, most examiners don't like a student who is trying to bluff. That is very important. So if you haven't done if you haven't asked something, please be strong enough to say that, sorry, sir, I forgot to ask. So that is one. Second, I have seen many students faltering on expression, on communication, and for that, practice is very important. Don't think that I will do it in the exam. What you do in your day-to-day ward rounds presentation is what you do in the exam also. So please make it a habit that when your teacher, when your consultant is doing the routine morning, evening round, when you present the cases, when you report a post-operative course, do it as if you are doing it in the exam. So that is the rehearsal. Same way, when a first year resident is doing the ward round with the chief resident or with the senior resident, do it like a rehearsal for your exam. And so I have seen many students, because I can see that the student knows, but he or she is not able to convey it to me or to the examiner properly. That is another, I wouldn't say mistake, but a weakness on the part of the students. And casual approach. So be meticulous, be detailed, and follow the algorithm of examination and history and examination religiously in every case. Don't be casual. So even after history or after some part of examination, you know that this is the diagnosis, but don't then take it casually. Complete it like you would do in any case. So be complete, be thorough, and be truthful. That is important.
Quite often, candidate comes out and says, I've done very well. Even after the result comes, I don't know why I failed. No, because in MCH examination, I know, sir, that you will call the candidate and say where all has gone wrong. But MS general surgery, such things are not possible. How will one deal with that? It says, no, I've done extreme well. I don't know. I think something has gone wrong. The examiner has failed.
Yeah, actually that happens. There are two, or I should say there are many types of examiners. There are some examiners who, when you reply, they would say yes or no to tell you whether you are right or wrong. There are some examiners who just don't respond. They just keep listening. So you don't know whether what you're saying is right or wrong. And there are some examiners who would say like this every time. So even when you are wrong, they would just keep doing like this. So then the student thinks, कि मैंने तो सारे आंसर करेक्ट दिए थे. I think that's basically a game between student and examiner. Ultimately, you have to understand that the switch is in the hand of the examiner. So you have to try to. I think if you know your subject, if you are clear in your thought and communication, if you are complete and thorough in your process of evaluating the patient, and if you are not bluffing, most of the times it should not be difficult. There is a question on the chat. Is SRB considered a standard textbook or quoted in the exam? I don't think I am competent to answer that question.
But
it's a very popular book. I know it's a very popular book.
Yes,
but since I have not read that book from A to Z, it is difficult for me to. But I'm sure if Dr. Bhatt has written that book, he must not have written anything which is not acceptable. So I see no reason why it cannot be quoted. It is a very respected book as far as I know.
Sir, one last question. Do you give any consideration for a candidate who is appearing a second time?
I personally would not give a consideration to that fact, but I would definitely try to find out whether the reason for the student failing was medical and surgical, as I said, knowledge and thoroughness, or whether it is his poor communication and all. Because if that is there, then somehow I will try to extract what he knows rather than what he doesn't know, and maybe be a little helpful on that ground, but not on humanitarian ground that he has failed so many times. Again, I would not quote the center or exam or anything. There has been one occasion in my lifetime where on this ground that there was a student who was probably third, fourth, or maybe more number of attempts, and there was a lot of pressure, and my senior co-examiner was very benevolent, and on that ground he said okay, and then because he was my senior examiner, I just kept quiet.
Sir, if the internal tells you that this candidate is not a nice fellow, and you find that the candidate is very good in the examination, what will you do?
First, as a teacher, as a trainer, as a mentor, and this I have published in the Amasi newsletter, that how to be a good Dronacharya today. What are the qualities of a good teacher or a good mentor? Again, if any student wants to read that article, please send me a mail. And the second part of that will be what not to do as a good teacher. So this is one thing which no teacher should do. No teacher should tell in the external examination that this boy or this girl is not a good candidate. We should leave it. If the student is not good, the examiners will find it. Let the examiners find it. You may sometime recommend a candidate for passing if the candidate has not done well in the exam. That is acceptable because the student was very sincere, is a good surgeon, is a good scientist, or whatever, some good qualities. So recommendation for is acceptable, although not necessary that I will pass a student based on that recommendation. But I don't mind that, because that shows a good quality of the student. But I don't expect any teacher to tell me in the exam that don't pass this student. I don't think any teacher should do that. That's my personal opinion.
Sir, if there is a tie between, if the four examiners, two are for, two are against, how will you decide?
Most of the times, if there is a tie, most examiners will push the candidate on the positive side. Most of the times. So because, as I said, that passing an exam is, we have to make sure that you will not be a danger to the patient. Every surgeon is not a good surgeon. Every student is not a brilliant student. That is why pass marks are kept at 50. They are not kept at 99. If we wanted to do that, we should have kept the pass marks at 99.
True.
That is not the aim. And so in such cases, the internal assessment, most of the times the examiners will ask, "Arey yaar, ye patient ko nuksan to nahi karega, ye dangerous to nahi ho jayega." If the internals feel, no, he's a safe surgeon. And one thing which I feel, not only for a student who has just passed, but even at my stage, every surgeon should know his limitations. You should know what you cannot do and what you should not. Then you will not harm the patient. Complications will occur. Complications are not harming the patient. But something which I do knowing very well that I can't do it or I'm not capable of doing it, that is harming the patient. So if I can't do single incision laparoscopic cholecystectomy and tomorrow I try to do that, I'm harming the patient. Although I have done thousands of conventional laparoscopic cholecystectomies.
Professor TRG?
Dr. Patta, in the same context of what you asked, there was a very senior surgeon, Professor S.K. Nair in Delhi. He was our examiner, and he used to come right in front of us, and in the case he used to sit, as Dr. Kapoor has said, he used to mark 50 out of 100 straight away before even the exam starts. And he says, this is how these marks are. From now on, to take it on the other side or to this side, it's the choice is for you. I am starting with 50 out of 100. So that I think the examiners come with the idea only to pass the candidate. The student should not dig their own grave and fail. So for every major error he makes, it will go on the negative side, and everything positive he tells, he goes on the positive side. I think that was Professor S.K. Nair, who was our examiner in Maulana Medical College in Delhi. So that was it used to give a lot of confidence to the students to start presenting.
Yes.
So any more comments from the audience? If there are no more, sir, thank you so much for yet another wonderful lecture from you, sir.
Thank you.
I shall end the meeting. Thank you.